Before we begin tonight's story, I want you to picture this: a remote Alaskan town, population 312, winter nights that last 14 hours, and a list of rules, handwritten, badly stained, posted inside every home. Rules that aren't suggestions, rules that keep you alive. I thought they were just old frontier superstitions, until the night I saw something tall and wrong, standing in the middle of the road, waiting for me to break rule number 4. Tonight, I'm going to tell you exactly what happened and why our rules are changing. The first thing I remember about Blackridge wasn't the cold or the smell of jet fuel or even the sharp bite of the wind slicing across the runway. No, what stayed with me, what still creeps into my sleep some nights, was the silence, a heavy, unnatural hush that settled over everything the moment the plane door opened. It wasn't the peace and quiet kind of silence. It was the kind that felt like the land itself was holding its breath. I stepped onto the metal stairs with my duffel slung over my shoulder, my boots hitting the frosted steps hard enough to echo. Behind me, the pilot spoke in low murmurs, their eyes scanning the sky with an unease I didn't understand yet. The daylight was dim, even though it was midday, weak light filtering through thick clouds rolling like slow-moving predators above the tree line. Beyond the runway, jagged ridges boxed the town in, sharp and uneven like broken teeth. Snow softened their edges, but somehow made them feel even more menacing. 8 years on various police forces had taught me to read atmosphere. Something about Blackridge felt wrong, like the world here hummed at a different frequency. I remember thinking that maybe it was just nerves. I'd taken this job to get away from everything: my father's death, my failed relationship, the slow erosion of purpose that had been eating at me for years. When the recruitment posting asked for an officer willing to work in a northern remote town under intense environmental conditions, it felt like a fresh start, a chance to become someone better, someone useful, a person with a clean slate. Turns out you don't get clean slates. The past always follows you. It just changes shape depending on where you're standing. I pushed forward through the wind toward the small terminal building, if you could call it that. More like a glorified shed with windows. A figure stood outside the door, arms crossed, face partially hidden behind a fur-lined hood. She watched me approach with the calm, steady focus of someone who'd seen too much to be impressed by anything new. "You, Ward?" she asked as I reached the door. Her voice was gravelly, low but firm. A woman in her early 50s, tall, weathered in the way people get when they've lived decades in places that demand everything from them. "Yes, ma'am," I said, shifting my bag. "Elias Ward." She didn't smile. "I'm Chief Nora Halstead. Grab your things. We're behind schedule." Behind schedule for what? I didn't ask. She didn't strike me as the type who liked questions. The ride from the tiny airport into Blackridge was quiet except for the crunch of snow beneath the tires and the low hum of the heater struggling against the cold. The SUV rattled over patches of ice, the windows fogging slightly with each exhale. Outside, the world was a blur of white, dark pines and shadows that seemed to flicker just beyond the reach of the headlights. We passed a cluster of houses, small, sturdy places, built for survival rather than comfort. Smoke rose from chimneys. A few people trudged through the snow, bundled so heavily it was hard to tell who was who. Chief Halstead broke the silence without taking her eyes off the road. "You moved from Minnesota?" I nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Cold there," she said. "Not like this." "No," she agreed. "Not like this." The way she said it made something cold settle in my spine. We pulled up to a squat building with a metal roof, weighed down by layers of hardened snow. A wooden sign out front read, "Blackridge Outpost, Police Substation." The snowdrifts nearly covered the first word. I followed her inside. The air was warmer, filled with the faint smell of old wood, coffee grounds, and something metallic beneath it all. She tossed a set of keys onto the desk beside me as I adjusted to the light. "Upstairs is your living space. You'll settle in later. First, you need to meet Officer Cross." As if on cue, a woman stepped through the doorway that led to the filing room. Mid-40s, sharp blue eyes, face framed with streaks of gray hair, pulled back into a practical braid. She gave me a firm nod. "You must be Ward," she said. "Lena Cross." We shook hands. Her grip was strong, steady, the kind of handshake that told me she had saved lives, and probably taken some too. "Welcome to Blackridge," she said. "Before we get into your gear and your orientation, there's something you need to see." Chief Halstead leaned against a desk, arms folded. "Give it to him." Officer Cross reached into her jacket and pulled out a small laminated card. She placed it in my hand carefully, almost reverently. When I saw what was written on it, I laughed. Not a full laugh, more like a startled breath of disbelief. "You're kidding," I said. Neither of them smiled. "Read it," Halstead said. I did, and that was the first moment I realized Blackridge was not the fresh start I thought it would be. It was something else entirely, something I wasn't ready for, and something that would change everything I believed about reality. The laminated card felt oddly warm in my hand, as if the paper itself had a pulse. The lettering was bold, simple, and direct. No explanations, no disclaimers, no elaborate procedures. Just 6 lines, 6 rules, 6 things I was apparently expected to follow as strictly as state law. I read them once, then again, and the second time, something in my chest tightened. Rule 1. If you hear footsteps upstairs after midnight, leave the building without closing the door. Never check the source. Rule 2. If you see someone standing beside the radio tower, ignore them. Never shine a light at them. Rule 3. If a voice calls your name from the tree line, walk away calmly. They mimic perfectly. Rule 4. Never open your door between 12:13 a.m. and 12:17 a.m. That's when the boundary thins. Rule 5. Feed the silver-striped fox if it watches you. It chooses who gets protected. Rule 6. If the sky goes silent during the aurora, hide underground and do not look at the lights. When I finally looked up, both women were watching me carefully. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my tone light, though a knot was forming slowly beneath my ribs. "Your orientation packet starts with that," Officer Cross said. "Consider it your real training." "This is a joke, right?" I said. "A hazing ritual." Halstead stepped forward, her expression carved from stone. "Ward," she said, "Blackridge is not like the places you've worked before. These rules are non-negotiable. You will follow them every single day you're here." "But footsteps upstairs?" I asked. "Foxes choosing people. Radio tower silhouettes. Come on." She didn't blink. "These rules have saved the lives of every officer who's stayed longer than a month." "And the ones who didn't stay?" I asked. Cross answered in a quiet tone. "They left in body bags." The silence between the three of us thickened, settling over the room like a heavy snowfall. Chief Halstead finally sighed and picked up her coat. "I'll leave you two to it. Cross, take him on the orientation patrol." "Yes, Chief." Halstead paused before walking out the door. She turned back to me, her expression softer but no less serious. "Ward," she said, "every person who came here thought the rules were ridiculous. You won't be any different. But take this advice for free. Disbelief is the most dangerous thing in this town." And with that, she stepped outside into the cold. Cross gestured toward me. "Come on, you need context before the sun sets." I followed her outside, the cold instantly biting into the exposed skin on my face. She led me to a police SUV, equipped with chains on the tires and a heater so loud it rattled the dashboard. We drove through town slowly, past rows of small houses with steep metal roofs and chimneys puffing thin trails of smoke. Blackridge wasn't big, maybe 500 people scattered across a valley bordered by ridges and thick forest. The place had a rugged serenity to it, a kind of resilience carved into every building, every snowbank, every footpath beaten into the drifts. Cross pointed to a group of children playing outside a schoolhouse as we drove past. "Kids stay indoors after dusk, no exceptions," she said. "You'll understand why soon." She turned down a road that ran parallel to the old mining ridge. Massive evergreen trees rose like silent guardians on both sides. "You came out here for a reason," she said suddenly. "Not a question. More like recognition." "I needed a reset," I admitted. "After my father passed, things stopped making sense for a while." Cross nodded thoughtfully. "Blackridge can give you purpose, but it'll test you first." "What do you mean, test?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she slowed the car as we approached a tall metal tower, rising from the snow like the skeleton of something long dead. At its base, a chain-link fence stood half buried under accumulated drifts. The tower itself leaned slightly, rust streaking its frozen supports. "The radio tower," she said quietly. "What about it?" She pointed with a gloved finger. My stomach dropped. A person was standing beside the tower, motionless, facing our direction, but so still that it looked almost sculpted from ice. The figure was tall, wearing something that might have been winter clothing, but the colors were muted, washed out, wrong. There was something else too, something I couldn't articulate. The air around it shimmered faintly, like heat waves rising from asphalt in summer. My hand drifted toward the flashlight clipped to my vest. Cross's voice cut through the tension, sharp and controlled. "Don't," she said, "but Rule 2, Ward." Her tone brooked no argument. "Don't shine a light at it, and don't stare." I forced myself to look away. My throat had gone dry. "What is that?" I asked. "A reason you follow the rules," she said. "Come on, we're not staying here." She accelerated away from the tower, and I kept my eyes fixed on the dashboard. The figure never moved, not even once. When we'd put enough distance between us and the tower, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Cross glanced at me. "You okay?" "No," I admitted. "What the hell did I just see?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she said something I would come to understand deeply in the months ahead. "In Blackridge, Ward, the less you look at something, the better your chances are of surviving it." Snow crunched beneath the SUV's tires as we left the tower far behind. My pulse was still hammering from whatever I'd seen, or whatever I'd almost seen. The silence in the vehicle felt loaded, like Cross was measuring how much of the truth I was ready to hear. Eventually, she spoke. "Rule 2 exists because that thing isn't a person, Ward. It never has been." My skin prickled. "Then what is it?" She kept her eyes on the road. "A remnant, a watcher. We don't know what it wants, only that looking at it too long makes people unravel." "Unravel?" some freeze. Some walk toward the tower and never stop. Some disappear mid-step. She hesitated, and one officer years ago shined a flashlight on it. And Cross tightened her grip on the wheel. We found the flashlight and one boot, that's it. A heaviness settled in my stomach. This place wasn't just eerie. It felt fundamentally wrong in a way that tugged at instincts older than language. Before I could respond, the radio crackled to life, breaking the tension. "Cross, you copy?" It was Halstead's voice. Cross picked up the mic. "Go ahead, Chief." Powers flickering on the east grid. Might be the cold snap pushing through. Keep an eye out. Copy that. I looked out the window just as lights in the far-off cabins blinked twice, then steadied. The sky above them swirled with thick gray clouds, heavy with an incoming storm. "What kind of cold snap kills power out here?" I asked. Cross shook her head. "The normal kind, sure, but this—" She trailed off, watching the darkening sky. "This feels like something else." We drove up a steep incline that ended at a lookout point on a high ridge. She parked the SUV near the wooden guardrail. Wind blasted us the moment we stepped outside, whipping snow against our faces like sand. "Come here," Cross said, motioning for me to follow her to the overlook. The valley stretched wide beneath us, its frozen rivers glinting faintly in the dim light. Pines coated in frost leaned under the weight of the wind. Empty highway, silent forest. A place that looked calm from far away, like a postcard. But the closer I looked, the more I felt watched. Cross stood beside me, her breath clouding in the air. "Look out there." "Really look." "I am." "No," she said. "Look deeper." I squinted into the valley, letting my eyes adjust. At first, I saw nothing, only shadows of trees and swirling drifts of snow. But then, movement, far too smooth to be an animal. A shape drifting between trees, barely visible, as if it was made of smoke or cold mist. My breath hitched. "What is that?" "One of the things the boundary keeps out," she said. "On good days?" "And on bad days?" I asked. She exhaled slowly. They come closer. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The wind moaned through the pines, a sound that seemed almost articulate, like a voice straining to make itself understood. Then Cross tapped her watch. "We need to get moving. You should see the Blackridge outpost before dark." We drove downhill again, deeper into the north side of town. I tried to clear my head, but the image of that drifting shape between the trees kept replaying in my mind. Cross must have noticed. "Ward, most people think fear is the enemy, but here, fear keeps you alive. Complacency gets you killed." Her words lingered as she pulled into a small clearing with a squat log building near the forest edge. A radio tower stood behind it, much smaller than the one we'd seen earlier. "This is our north outpost," she said. "Backup comms, emergency shelter, supply drop site. But we also keep something else here." "What's that?" She led me into the outpost. The inside was dim, lit only by battery lanterns. A wood stove radiated weak heat. A metal table stood in the center, and on it, a wooden box carved with symbols I didn't recognize. Cross lifted the lid. Inside lay several objects, smooth stones carved with spirals, bundles of braided twine, and a small vial of something dark red. "What are these?" I whispered. "Protective tools," she said. "Old ones. Older than Blackridge. Older than anything documented." "And we use them?" "Only when the rules start failing." I stared at the items, an inexplicable shiver crawling down my spine. "Why show me this?" I asked. "Because you're not here by accident," Cross said. "This town It has a way of pulling in the people it needs." Her words echoed in my chest more strongly than they should have. A strange déjà vu washed over me, like I'd been here before or dreamed of this moment long before it happened. I stepped back, unsettled. Cross closed the box gently. "Ward, tonight you'll understand why the rules matter. And you'll see the kind of things we protect people from." "How?" I asked. She gave me a look that sent a cold ripple down my spine. "Because the first real test is coming." She glanced toward the forest, and it's already on its way. Cross closed the wooden box and secured the latch, her movements firm and deliberate, as if the objects inside demanded a kind of respect. The outpost felt colder now, though the wood stove crackled quietly in the corner. I couldn't shake the feeling that opening that box had shifted something in the air, something subtle but almost sentient. "Come on," she said. "There's something else you need to see before the light dies." She grabbed a flashlight and opened the outpost door. Wind swept in, scattering loose papers and sending a shudder through the lantern flames. We stepped outside. Snow drifted down in lazy spirals now, thickening by the minute. The forest beyond the clearing had grown darker, as though the trees themselves had swallowed the last of the daylight. Cross led the way, boots crunching through fresh powder, her steps confident and unwavering. I followed close behind, every instinct screaming that we were heading into a place we shouldn't. "You're quiet," she said without turning. "Trying to figure out what exactly is happening here," I answered honestly. "You'll understand soon enough." We hiked about 100 yards from the outpost until the trees opened into a narrow ravine. Cross lifted her flashlight. "Look." I peered down and froze. Below us, the snow wasn't smooth. It was disturbed. Deep impressions carved into it, almost like footprints, but impossibly large, each one the size of a car tire. They trailed along the ravine and disappeared into thicker brush. "What made those?" I whispered. Cross lowered the beam, her voice soft. "Something that shouldn't be this close to town." "But what is it?" She shook her head. "We call it the drifter. It's not a creature. Not in the way you're imagining. It's more like a force, an instinct, a hunger that takes shape when the boundary weakens." "And this is normal?" "Nothing about it is normal," she said sharply, "but it's reality here." She knelt, brushing the edge of one massive print with her glove. "The drifter usually stays far beyond the tree line, but these prints are fresh." "How fresh?" Cross glanced at me, eyes narrowing. "Fresh enough that we shouldn't be standing here." A dry crack echoed somewhere deep in the woods. Not a twig snapping, something heavier, something deliberate. My heartbeat spiked. Cross stood immediately. Back to the outpost, now. We retraced our steps fast, nearly jogging. The forest behind us seemed to breathe, branches shifting without wind, silence thickening like a hand over my ears. We reached the clearing and the outpost came into view, but something stopped me dead. The door, it was open. Cross swore under her breath and rushed forward, gun drawn. I followed, my own hand going to my holster. We burst inside. The wooden box sat where we left it. The lantern still glowed. The stove flickered softly. But every single item inside that box, the stones, the braided twine, the vial, was gone. Cross scanned the room, hands trembling ever so slightly. "No," she whispered, barely audible. "Not today. Not now." "What happened? Who took them?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at the doorway, then at the dark wood around the windows. Something had scraped across the frame, a faint, fresh groove. long and jagged, a claw mark. She holstered her gun and closed the door gently, locking the bolt. "Ward," she said quietly, "listen very carefully." I swallowed hard. "I'm listening." Rule 3. If something steals what's meant to protect us, the boundary weakens even faster, and when that happens, night falls differently here. "What do you mean differently?" Cross brought her face close to mine, her eyes steady and unblinking. "You'll know when you see it." Even as she spoke, the lantern flames sputtered, shrinking as though suffocated by an invisible hand. Outside, the wind roared, and some distant voice or echo, whistled through the trees with an eerie pitch that made the hair on my arms stand straight up, a sound that was almost human and almost not. Cross grabbed her radio. "Chief, we have a breach at North Outpost. The protective set is gone." Static, then a warped voice crackled through the speaker. "Cross? Is that you? I see something moving." Halstead's voice twisted mid-sentence, glitching into something that didn't sound like him at all. Cross stiffened. "That's not the chief," she whispered. "We're leaving. Now." I stepped backward instinctively, adrenaline spiking. "Where are we going?" "The station. It's the only place with reinforced thresholds." "And what if that thing between the trees? What if it's following the prints we saw?" Cross opened the door, her jaw tight. "It's not following the prints, Ward." She scanned the dark forest, then faced me with stark clarity. "It's following us." Cross killed the lanterns before we stepped outside. She moved quickly, confidently, but I could sense the tension tightening her shoulders. The snow had grown heavier, falling in dense sheets that erased the tree line into a wall of gray. Wind roared across the clearing, but underneath it, beneath the natural noise, I heard something else, a rhythmic pulse, almost like breathing. "Stay close," Cross ordered, her voice steady but low. "If you hear anything call your name, you ignore it. If you see movement, you don't look long enough to study it. And if you feel watched—" She paused, swallowing. "You are." The SUV sat half buried in snowdrift, headlights fogged with frost. Cross brushed off the windshield with her sleeve while I checked our surroundings. The sensation of being observed had grown so intense it felt like a physical weight pressing between my shoulder blades. "Cross," I whispered, "something's in the tree line." "I know." She didn't look. "Get in the truck." We climbed into the SUV. Cross turned the ignition. The engine groaned, struggled, then died. She tried again. A sputter, a grinding whine, silence. My stomach dropped. "Is it the cold?" "No," she said. "It's them." The wind outside cut abruptly, like something had sucked it out of the air. Snow drifted sideways, then upward, defying gravity for a moment before falling again. And from the forest came a sound. Not laughter, not a whisper, not anything I'd ever heard from a living thing. It was a long, drawn-out wail that seemed to vibrate the ground itself. My chest tightened. The air in the SUV felt thinner, like the oxygen was draining away. Cross grabbed my arm, her grip like steel. "Ward, look at me. Listen carefully." "I'm listening. If that's the drifter, we are out of time. We can't stay here. We have to move on foot." "In the dark, with that thing out there?" She leaned forward slowly, checking the side mirror without letting her gaze linger. "Standing still is worse. The drifter hunts stillness." "Then what does it want?" "Movement, heat, anything alive enough to track." I stared at her, heart pounding. "So you want us to run?" "I want us to survive." She unbuckled her seatbelt, pulled her coat tight, and cracked the door open. A blast of icy air slammed into the SUV, making me gasp. Snowflakes spiraled inside, melting instantly on my cheeks. Cross stepped out and motioned. "Stay low, keep your head down, don't stop." Before I could move, the radio sputtered violently. Nah." The voice was fragmented, distorted, yet unmistakably familiar. It was my sister's voice, my sister who lived thousands of miles away and had never set foot in Alaska. I froze, cross-spun, eyes blazing. "Ward, out, now, that's not her." But the voice continued, breaking, glitching, rebuilding itself in a mimicry that hollowed out my stomach. "Nathan, why didn't you pick up when I called?" My throat constricted. "How does it know her voice?" Cross didn't answer. She grabbed my jacket and yanked me out of the SUV. The wind returned with a violent gust, slamming the door shut behind us. We crouched low, snow stinging our faces like needles. "That way," Cross hissed, pointing to a faint footpath cutting toward the ridge. "If we get high ground, we can radio the chief from the tower." I hesitated. "Cross, what if the drifter is between us and that ridge?" She looked toward the trees, jaw clenched. "It already is." A rush of cold swept past my ear, so cold it burned. Something enormous moved between the pines, its outline too tall and too wide to be human, shifting like a shadow made of muscle. Cross grabbed my wrist. "Move!" We ran. Branches cracked behind us. Snow burst upward in plumes as something followed, silent except for the earth trembling under its weight. My lungs screamed. My legs threatened to give out. But the ridge drew closer, 20 yards, 10. Then a voice boomed across the clearing, deep and resonant, shaking the air. "Nathan!" I stumbled, heart stuttering. Cross caught me mid-fall. "Don't stop!" she yelled, pulling me forward with raw strength. We reached the base of the ridge just as the shadow surged from the trees behind us, a towering, faceless silhouette rising in the snowstorm like a nightmare made flesh. Cross shoved me between two boulders as the wind howled again, the storm swallowing the clearing whole. "Welcome to Blackridge, Ward," she gasped. "Your real training starts now." The cold made everything sharper, the sting in my lungs, the burn in my fingers, and the realization that we had just outrun something no human vocabulary truly prepared you for. Cross and I crouched behind the jagged rocks at the base of Blackridge, our breaths visible in frantic bursts. Snow lashed against us in gusts that felt almost targeted, almost deliberate, but nothing was more unsettling than what I didn't hear. The silence behind us, the absence of footsteps, the monstrous shadow that had risen from the tree line, now simply gone. Cross pressed her back against the rock and motioned for me to stay low. Eyes down, not up, not back, down. The drifter doesn't move like we do. It doesn't follow straight lines. "How does it follow?" I whispered. She drew in a breath, steadying herself. "It follows intention, direction." "Fear." "Terrific," I muttered. "So basically everything about me right now." Cross gave a thin, humorless smirk. "Welcome to the job." Snow blew sideways, and I heard something faint. A deep, resonant hum rolling through the air like distant thunder. But it wasn't storm weather. The hum came from the ridge itself, vibrating the rock beneath my palms. Cross heard it too. "Good, the tower's active." "What does that mean?" "It means the boundary hasn't collapsed. Not yet." She stood slowly, brushing snow from her knees. "Ward, we need height. The drifter won't climb rock faces unless it has no choice. As long as we stay on the ridge path, we buy time." And if it decides it has a choice tonight? I asked. Cross didn't look at me. Then we run faster. We began ascending the incline, boots slipping through powder. Every few steps, I had to force myself not to look over my shoulder, not to check the shadows behind us. Every instinct screamed danger, but Cross's rules had already saved my life once. Don't look, don't listen, don't acknowledge. The ridge path narrowed as we climbed. To our right was a wall of jagged stone. To our left, open forest falling away into darkness. Somewhere below, something moved. Not loudly, not close, but unmistakably present. A slow drag, a low shift of weight across snow. Cross's pace quickened. Don't break stride. You hear it too? I asked, breath tight. Oh yeah. We crested a small shelf that overlooked the valley. The view should have been breathtaking. Endless trees stretching into a frozen horizon. But the moonlight revealed something unnatural. A swirling pattern in the snow, circular, too perfect. Like something huge had settled there, pressed its weight, then lifted off again. What made that? I whispered. Cross scanned the clearing below without blinking. Something we're not going to meet tonight. The hum grew louder as we continued upward. The tower now glowed faintly through the storm, a thin column of mechanical light cutting through the chaos. Then, a voice, soft, female, close. Nathan? I froze mid-step. It wasn't distorted like before. It wasn't glitchy. It wasn't warped. It was perfect, identical, intimate. My sister's voice, exactly as she sounded on the phone, warm and alive and impossible to mistake. She said my name again, gently, almost pleading, and it came from somewhere to my left, off the ridge, down in the darkness. Cross spun toward me, eyes fierce. Ward, don't even think. I shook my head. But that sounded real. It's not. Nothing that calls your name out here ever is. It spoke again, closer now. Nathan, help me, please. My stomach twisted. Panic flared like heat under my skin. Cross, what if something... She grabbed my jacket in both fists and yanked me forward. It knows you're listening. Move. We pushed onward, my pulse punching hard against my ribs. The voice kept calling, each repetition more desperate, more convincing, as if it were learning exactly which emotional string to pull. Don't slow down, Cross said between breaths. If you break pace, it'll try to mimic pain or panic or dying, whatever keeps you here. We reached a steep incline. Cross climbed first, then extended a hand to help me up. I grabbed her wrist and pulled myself over the edge and froze, because standing 20 feet up the path, half hidden behind a large boulder, was a dark silhouette, human-sized, still, watching, my breath hitched, fogging in front of me. Cross? I whispered. She didn't turn. Describe it, slowly. It's tall, almost my height, still, too still, and its head, I swallowed, it's tilted like it's listening. Cross exhaled sharply. Rule 2, don't stare. But is it the same thing we saw before? No, she said. This one's worse. The shadow moved. Not forward, not toward us, just shifted, like it was studying how we breathed. Cross reached for her radio with one hand and pressed the other against my chest, keeping me from stepping backward. Nathan, she whispered, voice level. Do not run. If you run, it chases. If you stare, it mimics. If you speak, it remembers. What do we do? My voice shook despite my best effort. She lifted her chin, eyes fixed ahead. We climb, slow, deliberate, and we pretend it's not there. And if it follows? It will, she said. Everything's hungry tonight. We began moving again, slow steps, steady rhythm, no sudden movements. Behind us, the silhouette drifted silently up the path, following at the exact same pace, not too fast, not too slow, just enough to let us know it would follow us all the way to the tower, and maybe beyond. The shadow followed with a patience that felt almost intelligent, as if it understood the exact pace required to keep us terrified, but not panicked. Cross didn't look back once, not even a flicker of her gaze, but the tension in her posture told me she felt its presence as sharply as I did. The wind picked up in a sudden vicious sweep, flinging ice crystals against our faces with enough force to sting. My eyes watered, my breath shortened, and for a moment, I couldn't tell which sounds were the storm and which were footsteps behind us. Cross leaned closer as she climbed. "Ward, keep your breathing steady. If it hears panic, it speeds up." "What happens if it catches us?" She didn't hesitate. "You don't want to know." We kept climbing in a careful, synchronized rhythm, not too fast, not too slow. Each step placed deliberately on stone, each inhale controlled. The ridge path became steeper, narrower. One wrong move and we'd slide off the edge into the forest below, a forest now swirling with movement far too coordinated to be wind. Ahead, the tower's beacon pulsed, the only stable point in a world that seemed to be losing its grip on reality. Every flash of light cut through the storm just enough to outline Cross's determined silhouette. Behind us, the mimic shadow drifted closer. It mimicked our steps, our pauses, our breathing, and then, when the wind lulled just slightly, it mimicked something else. A voice, mine, except not mine. "Nathan," it whispered in a perfect imitation of my tone, my cadence, the exact way my voice cracked when I was exhausted. "Slow down," I stumbled. Cross grabbed my arm so fast I didn't even register the motion. "Ignore it." "But ignore it." The shadow repeated the imitation, louder this time, as if pleased with the reaction. "Nathan, wait for me." Hearing my own voice come from behind us, smooth, unnatural, wrong, triggered something primal in my gut. A cold spike of terror shot down my spine. My legs shook. Cross yanked me upright. "Ward, look at me." Not at it. Me. I forced myself to focus on her face despite the storm. Steady eyes, strong jaw, snow clinging to lashes. A veteran officer who had survived things I still could barely accept as real. "You're not alone," she said firmly. "You're with me. Keep moving." The shadow drifted closer, its shape flickering like an out-of-focus image. It didn't touch the ground so much as glide across it. The storm parted around it in unnatural curls. As we ascended, the path curved sharply. Cross paused just long enough to whisper, "This next stretch is where most rookies fail." "What happens here?" "It tries to get ahead of us." "What does that mean?" "You'll see." The words barely left her mouth when the shadow behind us dissolved, vanished in a single blur of motion. My heart stopped. "Cross, where?" "Don't look around," she snapped, but it was too late. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement farther up the path. A shape, human-sized, waiting. Cross cursed under her breath. "It's learning your pace." How is that even possible? These aren't animals, Ward. They're echoes, residual imprints. They study whatever moves near the boundary long enough, and eventually, she exhaled, they get curious. The silhouette ahead tilted its head, mirroring the exact angle mine took when I was confused. I didn't realize I'd done it until I felt the movement in my neck. Fear knotted my stomach. It copied me. "It's going to do more than that," Cross said. "Just keep climbing. It only becomes dangerous when you acknowledge it." That seems like a pretty low threshold. "Welcome to Blackridge." We approached the curve, the shadow still waiting. My vision tunneled, heartbeat pounding in my ears. The wind died completely for a moment, leaving only silence. And then the shadow stepped aside, almost politely, like it was letting us pass. Cross nodded without breaking stride. Good, it hasn't attached yet. Attached? Not now. We edged past it, careful not to turn our heads or make sudden movements. Every nerve in my body screamed as I felt the thing's presence inches from me. It radiated a cold so intense that my skin prickled beneath all my layers. Then it leaned toward me, slowly, testing. I clenched my jaw so hard pain shot into my ears. Cross pressed forward, guiding us past the narrowest part of the ridge. When we reached a small plateau, she pulled me behind a rock outcrop and crouched low. "Ward," she whispered, "listen." Below us, the wind carried a low, rumbling sound. A second later, a shape tore across the forest floor, massive, fluid, too large to be anything natural. The drifter, hunting, searching, circling the ridge. Cross wiped snow from her forehead. "It's tracking something." "Us," I breathed. "No, not just us. Everything that stepped too close to its territory tonight." I peeked over the rock, and my blood turned to ice. Down below, the mimic shadow was standing still, facing the drifter directly. The drifter paused, turned its immense, formless head. And for a heartbeat, both creatures, two nightmares operating on rules I didn't understand, simply watched each other. Cross exhaled sharply. "That is very, very bad." "Why?" "Because shadows aren't supposed to interest the drifter." She stood abruptly. "We need to reach the tower. Now." The drifter shifted in the snow, lifting something like a limb, and the shadow responded by bending its shape in a perfect mirror, almost like greeting or recognition. My mouth went dry. "Cross, what does that mean?" She pulled me to my feet. "It means something is changing the rules." And we climbed, toward the tower, toward answers, toward a night that Blackridge had clearly been preparing for decades, and one that wanted us to play our part. The tower stood higher on the ridge now, its blinking red light pushing through the storm like a heartbeat in the darkness. Each pulse felt like a countdown, marking how little time we had left to understand what was happening. Cross kept a brutal pace as we climbed, her movements sharp and deliberate. I followed, forcing my legs up the incline, even as fatigue threatened to pull me backward. The storm's wind clawed at us, dragging snow sideways in sheets that obscured the world beyond a few short feet. "We're almost there," Cross called over the wind, but her voice carried a tension of someone trying to convince herself as much as me. Behind us, the ridge groaned beneath weight that wasn't ours. I didn't look. I couldn't look. I knew without seeing it that the mimic shadow was following. Patient, curious, hungry, and somewhere below, the drifter prowled the forest like a silent avalanche, moving with unnatural precision. "Cross," I gasped, "you said this isn't normal, that tonight isn't supposed to be like this." "No," she agreed sharply, "it's not." "So why now? Why us?" She slowed just long enough to look at me, really look at me, and for the first time since I arrived in Blackridge, I saw fear behind her hardened exterior. "One of them took something from the outpost." "The box?" She nodded grimly. "Those items aren't charms or rituals, Ward. They're anchors, old ones, from long before Blackridge existed. Without them, the boundary between our world and whatever's out there gets thinner." "And that's what's happening now?" "That's what's happening now." Lightning cracked across the sky, not bright but dim and sickly, like a weak pulse in a dying patient. The forest below lit up for half a second, long enough for me to see dozens of shapes between the trees. Not people, not animals, silhouettes, tall, rigid, motionless, silent watchers. "Cross," I whispered. "The valley is full." She didn't look. She didn't dare. "They follow the drifter," she said. "Wherever it goes, they multiply." Multiply? They're not alive, Ward. Not in any way we understand. They're reflections of whatever slips through the boundary. She paused. And once the boundary cracks, they fill every empty space they can find. The implications made my stomach churn. "Cross, how close are we to that happening?" She pressed a hand to her radio as if grounding herself. "Too close." As we neared the top of the ridge, something shifted in the wind. A high, thin whistle, strangely melodic at first, but quickly unraveling into something much more sinister. Whispers, dozens of them, layered, overlapping, calling my name one after another. "Nathan! Nathan! Nathan!" I stumbled, instinctively turning my head toward the sound. Cross slammed her palm against the back of my skull and forced my gaze downward. "Don't listen!" "But they're everywhere. They're in the trees. They want you to look. That's how they pull you in." I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing a hand against my ear. "They sound real. That's because they mimic emotion." She grabbed my arm. "They'll use whatever memory hurts the most." The whispers swelled, voices bending into shape, forming specific tones. My father's voice, broken, strained, shaky with the effort of speaking. "Nathan, don't leave me, not again." The world tilted, my throat closed, every inch of me froze in place. Cross gripped my chin, forcing me to meet her eyes. "That is not your father. That thing doesn't know him. It only knows you." She shook me until the voices blurred into white noise. "Breathe," she commanded. I inhaled, sharp and uneven. Again, I obeyed. The whispers faded slowly like retreating tides. "Good," she said. "Keep your focus on my voice, nothing else." We resumed climbing, but the forest below didn't grow quiet. The whispers continued, softer now, but insistent, always reaching. The higher we climbed, the more of the valley we could see through breaks in the storm. And what I saw turned my blood to ice. More silent watchers, dozens at first, then hundreds. Some clustered between trees, others stood in perfect rows along the frozen river. A few perched on the rooflines of distant cabins like grotesque ornaments, all motionless, all facing toward the ridge, toward us. "Cross," I whispered, "why are they all looking here?" She didn't answer, because she already knew. And so did I. We reached a narrow ledge that ran along the final incline toward the tower. The path was barely wide enough for both of us. One misstep and we'd fall into a field of watchers waiting below. Cross moved first, hugging the rock wall. "Stay close to the stone. Don't break contact." "How are you so calm?" I managed. She didn't look back. "Because I have to be." Halfway across the ledge, the wind died again. Everything went still. The storm paused mid-breath, holding snowflakes suspended in the air like crystal dust. The valley below fell silent. Even the whispers stopped. And then a hiss, right behind my ear, slow, cold, wordless. The mimic shadow. It had followed us onto the ledge. I didn't dare turn. My muscles locked, my breath seized. Cross's voice came low, controlled. "Ward, keep your hand on the wall. Keep moving." "What if it's about to—" "If you run," she said, "you fall. If you turn, it attaches. So you do the only thing still under your control." "What's that?" I whispered. "You walk." We took slow, synchronized steps forward. 5 feet, 10. The presence behind me drifted closer, so close I could feel the cold radiating through the layers of my coat. And then a low rumble shook the ridge. The drifter, moving fast. Cross cursed under her breath. It's coming up the slope. Something's driven it upward. What does that mean? My voice cracked. It means the boundary is failing faster than we thought. We moved faster, but not too fast. The tower's steel structure was now visible just ahead. A few more steps, and we'd reached the platform. The rumble grew louder. Then, silhouettes below began shifting, not walking, not gliding, rearranging like pieces of a puzzle assembling into a larger shape. Cross, I whispered, they're forming a line. I know. The wind roared back, scattering the suspended snow. The forest trembled. The ridge shook. The drifter surged upward. A massive tide of darkness accelerating straight toward us. Cross grabbed my arm. Ward, move! We sprinted the final stretch of the ledge as the shadow behind us lunged forward, matching our speed, and the drifter reached the ridge below with a sound like the world tearing open. The drifter hit the ridge with a force that felt less like impact and more like the land itself recoiling. Snow blasted upward in a white explosion, the shock wave slamming into us just as we reached the tower's platform. Cross pushed me through the metal gate, then threw her weight against it to keep it closed. "Nathan, get to the stairs," she yelled, but the wind swallowed her voice. Snow swirling around her like a living thing, clawing at her coat, her hair, her hands. I grabbed the rail and hauled myself toward the stairwell. The metal was ice cold, numbing my fingers instantly. Cross shoved the gate one final time, securing the latch with a hook before stumbling up behind me. The ridge below writhed with movement. Not just the drifter, the silent watchers were turning. They'd been facing the ridge. Now they were facing upward, toward us. One by one, hundreds of rigid silhouettes pivoted in perfect unison. Their heads, if you could call those shapes heads, tilted sharply like wolves catching a scent. My breath seized. "Cross," I whispered, "they're all looking at us." She didn't spare a glance. "Don't acknowledge them. They're moving." I said don't acknowledge them, but I couldn't help myself, because they weren't just moving, they were climbing, not running, not jumping, climbing the valley like a slow, inevitable tide, unhurried, relentless, silent. Cross turned sharply and gripped my shoulders so hard it jolted me back into my body. "Listen to me. They are reacting to the drifter's disruption, not us, not directly." "That doesn't make me feel better." "It's not supposed to." We reached the midpoint of the tower's stairs, just as the drifter slammed its weight into the base of the ridge again, the sound echoing through the valley like thunder trapped inside metal walls. The entire tower shuddered, metal groaned, bolts strained. The platform vibrated so violently I had to grab the railing with both hands to keep from falling. Cross braced herself beside me. "It's trying to climb." "Can it?" "No," she said. "Not unless—" The tower shook again, harder this time. "Something's helping it." My stomach dropped. What could help something that size? She didn't answer. Because the answer was climbing toward us, the mimic shadow. It had followed us onto the tower platform, slipping through the opened gate before Cross could fully close it. Now it drifted up the stairs, dissolving and reforming between each flash of the tower beacon, as if it didn't need steps or gravity or physics. And behind it, down below, the drifter roared, not loudly, not like an animal, but like a warning. Cross grabbed my wrist. "We need to get inside the tower, now." "There's an inside. Top floor, old radio room." We scrambled upward, boots slipping on icy metal. Snow thickened, turning into a white curtain that stole visibility. My muscles burned, my breath ragged. The footsteps behind us, those weren't real footsteps, I knew that now. But the absence of sound was worse. The mimic shadow was close, too close. Every instinct screamed to run, but running meant panic, and panic meant drawing attention. So we forced ourselves into a steady pace, even as adrenaline begged me to sprint. At the final landing, Cross shoved open a metal door. Inside, we stumbled into a narrow stairwell that spiraled up to the radio room. The air tasted of rust, ozone, and old dust. The storm's howl faded just slightly as the door slammed shut behind us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Cross locked the door and whispered, "We have minutes at best." "What do we do now?" She swallowed. "We get answers." We climbed the narrow stairs to the top floor. The room was small, circular, filled with old radio equipment and a thick paneled window that overlooked the valley. Dust coated every surface except for one desk, recently disturbed. Papers lay scattered, maps, a torn notebook, and something else, a strip of fabric, silver striped, like the fox from Rule 5. Cross stiffened. "That shouldn't be here." "What is it?" I asked. She lifted the fabric with shaking fingers. "A marking, a sign of protection. Someone or something brought this here for a reason." I leaned closer. The fabric smelled faintly of ice and pine sap, and something older, something that made my stomach twist. Before I could ask more, the radio crackled. Not static, a voice, weak at first, then clearer. "Nora, you there?" It was Chief Halstead. Cross grabbed the mic. "Chief, we're at the tower. The drifter's active, the watchers are mobilizing, and we have a mimic on the stairs." Static washed over the signal. Then, "Listen, carefully." Something breached the southern line. Several anchors destabilized. Cross's eyes widened. "How many?" "2, maybe 3. "That means the boundary is collapsing," she said under her breath. Halstead continued, voice breaking, "And whatever stole the objects from the outpost, if you find it, do not engage. Repeat, do not engage." Static exploded across the speaker. Then a second voice faded in behind the chief's transmission. Wrong, layered, mimicking. "Nora." Cross went rigid. "That's not him," I said. "No," she whispered. "It's not." The mimic voice grew louder. "Nora, you left the door open." Cross slammed her hand on the transmitter and shut the radio off entirely. For a full 10 seconds, we stood in silence. Then, a slow tap from outside the stairwell door. Tap, 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 the same rhythm as our footsteps climbing the tower. My heart stopped. "Cross," I whispered. "It followed us." She backed away from the door, pulling me with her. "Stay quiet." But the tapping grew louder, slow, deliberate, testing the door. Tap, tap, tap. Then a whisper bled through the metal. "Nothing." My knees buckled, and the door handle turned. The door handle twitched a second time. Once, twice. Slow, careful rotations like a child trying out a toy. Metal scraped softly against metal as something on the other side explored the mechanism, curious, patient, almost playful. Cross dragged me behind the tall transmitter rack and pressed a finger to her lips. Silence. Absolute silence. I held my breath until my chest burned, every nerve screaming as the handle twitched again. The door didn't open, not fully, but enough that the faintest sliver of cold air slipped through, carrying with it a smell I couldn't place. Not decay, not earth, something empty. Like the absence of scent itself. And then it spoke. "Nathan, I made it. I followed." The voice was perfect, identical to mine. Same breath pattern, same subtle rasp at the end of the N. But beneath the words, something cracked, like bones bending the wrong way. My fingers dug into the metal rack. The floor vibrated under me, not from footsteps, but from the drifter below slamming against the ridge again. The tower swayed. Dust drifted down from the beams overhead. Cross leaned close, whispering so quietly I barely heard her over my own heartbeat. If the mimic gets inside, we don't survive. How does it even know how to turn the handle? I breathed. It learns. She swallowed hard. It learns fast. The handle rotated almost halfway now. One more turn, and the latch would release. Cross moved like lightning. She slid across the floor, staying low, stopping just inches from the door. She didn't touch it. Instead, she pressed both hands over the latch, holding it in place through force alone. The mimic paused. The air thickened. The temperature dropped so sharply my breath fogged instantly. "Nora," the voice whispered from the other side now. Cross flinched. "That's not my name," she mouthed to me. But the voice tried again, adjusting, shifting tone, pitch, cadence. "Nora, open, please." She squeezed her eyes shut, jaw trembling with restraint. "Don't answer," she whispered. The mimic pressed its weight against the door. The metal groaned, hinges protesting. The tower rocked again. Wind or the drifter, I couldn't tell anymore. Cross motioned for me to move toward the radio console. I obeyed silently, crawling across the floor with slow, deliberate movements. I reached the panel and flipped open a protective cover. Underneath sat the emergency channel switch, the one tied to the old mining lines beneath the ridge. Cross hissed through clenched teeth, "Channel 7, do not hit 9. "What happens on 9? "You call something worse." I didn't ask what worse meant. Not tonight. Not with that thing at the door. I switched to Channel 7, static hissing through the speaker. I lowered the volume until it was barely audible. Cross whispered, "Try the chief again." I pressed the mic button. "Chief Halstead, this is Ward. We're at the tower. We need immediate." Static surged so violently I jerked the mic away. Then, "Ward!" A whisper, soft, wet, like someone speaking through water. Cross's eyes snapped open. "Turn it off." It sounded like, "Turn it off." I shut the radio down just as something slammed against the door from outside. The metal buckled inward, sending a jolt through the entire room. Bolts strained. The frame shook. Glass rattled in the windows. The mimic wasn't trying to open the door anymore. It was trying to break it. Cross braced her back against the door, boots digging into the floor for leverage. She grunted with the force, her face twisting with effort. "Ward," she rasped, "look around the room. Anything heavy, anything we can use to barricade." I scanned the cluttered space. A filing cabinet, a desk bolted to the wall, a metal chair, and then the silver-striped fabric on the table. The fox's marking, Rule 5. Feed the fox, gain protection. "Cross," I whispered. "This was left here for a reason." "What are you thinking?" "What if it's not a warning? What if it's a key?" She blinked sweat from her eyes, barely able to hold the door closed. "Ward, unless that scrap of fabric turns into a shotgun, I'm open to ideas." I picked it up. The room changed immediately. The tower shuddered. The storm outside shifted. The valley below let out a sound that wasn't wind. Cross stared at the cloth in my hand. "Ward, what did you just—" The mimic screamed. Not human, not animal. A sound like the tearing of metal and the collapse of earth. A sound so violent it rattled the fillings in my teeth. Cross recoiled from the door. "It's afraid." "It's afraid of the fox," I said, breath shaking. "Why?" But Cross wasn't listening. She grabbed my collar and yanked me to the far corner of the room. "Ward, hold that fabric tight." She crouched beside me, eyes wide, voice trembling. "Listen to me. Whatever that fox is, whatever it marked you." "What does that mean?" "It means you're not just protected." The mimic shrieked again, slamming the door so hard the hinges tore halfway out of the frame. Cross whispered, "It means you're being claimed." The door bent inwards, metal tearing, wood splintering, snow blasting through the widening crack, and just before the mimic squeezed through the gap, before the drifter roared up the ridge, before the silent watchers swarmed the valley floor, the tower's beacon went dark. Everything fell silent. Then the light returned, bright, violent, shattering the darkness, and the mimic vanished, gone, instantly, pulled back by something far older and far stronger than the boundary itself. Cross's jaw dropped. "Holy hell, Ward. What happened?" She exhaled, trembling. "The fox didn't just protect you." She looked toward the window where the storm suddenly calmed. "It protected all of Blackridge for tonight."